Hidden for 1600 years, ancient Byzantine city discovered beneath Egypt's western desert reveals church, homes, coins, and everyday life. A spectacular archaeological discovery in Egypt's western desert has revealed a remarkably well-preserved 1600-year-old Byzantine city, offering an extraordinary glimpse into daily life during one of the country's most fascinating historical periods. Now let's explore the complete story from every perspective on our AI podcast.
1600 years ago, in the middle of a just brutal, unforgiving Egyptian desert, someone sat down, grabbed a broken piece of clay pottery, and scribbled out a grocery list.
They probably complained about the price of grain while they were at it.
Right, exactly. They handed it to a neighbor, and then, they probably never thought about it again. But today, we are actually going to read it.
It's pretty incredible to think about.
It really is, because, when you think of ancient Egypt, it is so easy to just picture the movie poster, right? The towering pharaohs, the massive pyramids baking in the sun, the golden mask of King Tut.
The highlight reel.
Yeah, the highlight reel. It feels grand, it feels monumental, and honestly, it feels entirely disconnected from us. But today, for this deep dive, we are sneaking past that movie poster. We're walking right onto the soundstage to see how the crew actually lived, worked, and, texted each other.
I love that analogy. We are basically stripping away the sand to look at the living, breathing mechanics of a civilization.
Right.
Because it is incredibly easy to get caught up in the mythology and the sheer scale of the architecture. But Egypt wasn't just a static museum of monuments. It was this continuously evolving, highly organized society that had to figure out how to survive, thrive, and adapt across, multiple different empires and eras.
So to do that, we have three distinct archaeological breakthroughs to explore today. We are going to look at the 4,600-year-old earthquake-proof engineering hidden inside the Great Pyramid.
Which is just wild to think about.
It's so cool. Then we're going to uncover this really bizarre golden burial ritual on the Mediterranean coast. And finally, our main event, the spectacular discovery of a completely preserved 1,600-year-old Byzantine city deep in the western desert.
That's the one I'm really excited to get into.
Oh, same. But let's kick things off with the oldest discovery, going back roughly 4,600 years to the Great Pyramid of Pharaoh Khufu. Researchers have recently concluded that this pyramid possesses an extraordinary resistance to earthquakes. And, they've realized this isn't just because it's a giant, heavy pile of rocks.
Right. No, it's far from it. When we look at the internal mechanics of the pyramid, we see a profound, completely intentional mastery of physics.
Okay.
The first crucial decision the builders made was foundational, literally. They chose to construct the monument directly on a massive plateau of solid limestone bedrock.
Which, that sounds obvious, right? Build on solid ground. But what does that actually do in a massive seismic event?
It prevents a phenomenon called liquefaction.
Liquefaction. Okay, what is that?
So when an earthquake hits, loose soil or sand essentially loses its strength and its stiffness because of the intense shaking, and it behaves almost exactly like a liquid.
Oh, wow. So the ground literally acts like water.
Exactly. So if you build a massive stone structure on top of soil that suddenly turns to liquid, the building sinks. It shifts and it collapses under its own weight.
That makes total sense.
Right. So by anchoring the pyramid directly into solid limestone bedrock, they created a stable, unmoving base that transfers the seismic waves without compromising the ground underneath it.
Okay, so the bedrock handles the ground beneath it. But the internal structure is doing a lot of heavy lifting too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The highly symmetrical design distributes forces evenly. And they engineered this really rigid internal structure with very specific pressure-relieving chambers above the king's chamber. It basically functions remarkably like a 4,600-year-old architectural shock absorber.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Those pressure-relieving chambers are a masterclass in weight diversion. Inside the pyramid, directly above the burial chamber, there are 5 separate compartments.
5 of them?
Yeah, 5. And they are built using these massive horizontal granite beams with empty spaces between them. And the very top chamber is capped with a vaulted gabled roof. So essentially a massive stone triangle.
Okay, but how does empty space and a triangular roof act as a shock absorber? I'm trying to picture the physics here.
Think about the kinetic energy of a massive force, whether it's the shifting of the earth during a quake or honestly just the crushing static weight of millions of tons of stone pressing down from above that force wants to travel straight down.
Right, gravity.
Gravity. And if it hits a flat ceiling, the ceiling eventually cracks. But when that downward force hits that vaulted triangular roof, The angle physically deflects the kinetic energy.
Oh, I see.
It pushes the weight outward diagonally into the massive solid core of the pyramid, so it completely bypasses the empty chambers and the king's chamber below it. It is actively channeling the stress away from the most vulnerable part of the building.
But wait, let me challenge this for a second, because we are talking about 4,600 years ago. Does this level of engineering suggest they were actively anticipating seismic activity? I mean, were ancient Egyptian architects sitting around drawing up blueprints specifically to beat an earthquake? Or is this shock absorber effect just like a happy accident of trying to prevent the ceiling from caving in under its own weight?
Well, the sheer number of distinct, deliberate structural choices points heavily toward intentional multi-purpose design.
Really? You think they knew?
I do. You do not accidentally design a 5-tier pressure relieving system with a perfectly angled, gabled roof that flawlessly displaces downward kinetic force. Plus, Egypt does experience seismic activity. It sits near the boundary of the African and Arabian tectonic plates.
Oh, right, of course.
They would have seen lesser buildings crack or settle over time. They knew they were engineering a structure meant to last for eternity. To do that, you have to account for both the constant enemy, which is gravity, and the unpredictable enemy, which is the shifting Earth. They understood the physical mechanisms required to beat both.
That is staggering. Just the idea that they mastered the physics of kinetic energy deflection millennia before modern engineering.
It's brilliant.
So if the pyramid is about using monumental physics to protect a king's body from the forces of the earth, how did later everyday people protect themselves against the spiritual forces of the afterlife?
Yeah, a completely different kind of engineering.
Exactly. That question moves us from macro-level physical preservation to a very intimate micro-level spiritual preservation.
And it moves us forward in time, too. And north, geographically, to the Mediterranean coast during the Greek and Roman periods in Egypt.
Right. So Egyptian researchers recently uncovered a site at Marina El Alamein, which is about 60 miles west of Alexandria. They excavated 18 ancient tombs containing some remarkable funerary objects.
Really fascinating stuff in there.
Yeah, there's an enormous 8-foot-long granite sarcophagus, a damaged plaster sphinx, but the detail that completely stops you in your tracks is the golden tongue ritual.
Yes.
They found multiple burials where thin foils made of pure gold were placed directly inside the mouths of the deceased.
It's such a striking visual, and it's a deeply meaningful ritual, too. The belief was that placing gold inside the mouth would enable the dead to speak in the afterlife.
But wait, if the goal is just to ensure they can speak to the gods, why go to the trouble of physically altering the dead body with metal? I mean, wouldn't burying them with a scroll of spells like the Book of the Dead, wouldn't that do the exact same trick? Why physically put gold in the mouth?
Because of the specific properties of gold and how the ancient Egyptians viewed it. Gold is one of the only metals that does not tarnish. It doesn't degrade or rust.
Okay, it stays perfect.
It remains eternally brilliant, exactly. In their theology, gold was literally considered the flesh of the gods. A papyrus scroll can rot, can be eaten by insects, it can be destroyed. But by physically placing a golden tongue in the mouth of the deceased, you are grafting a piece of divine, incorruptible flesh onto a mortal body.
Oh, wow. You are giving them an immortal tool.
Yes, and you really need that tool because the Egyptian afterlife was not just some peaceful paradise you passively flowed into.
It wasn't.
No, it was a rigorous, terrifying bureaucracy. To get to paradise, the field of reeds, you had to navigate the Hall of Mahat. This involved the famous weighing of the heart, but it also involved standing before 42 separate divine judges.
42 judges. Even in death, you can't escape a panel interview.
A panel interview where the stakes are eternal oblivion.
Oh my God.
You had to recite the negative confession, declaring to each specific judge a sin you had not committed. So, I've not stolen, I've not lied, and so on. If you stuttered, if you forgot a name, or if you were rendered mute, you failed. Your soul would be fed to a demon called Emmet, and you would just cease to exist.
So the Golden Tongue is essentially a VIP backstage pass for the bureaucratic underworld.
Pretty much, yeah.
It guarantees you will not be silenced when it matters most. It's an eternal insurance policy.
It's a perfect encapsulation of how deeply they plan for every contingency, just like the builders of the pyramids did. And what's really fascinating about Marina El Alamein is that this is happening during the Greek and Roman era.
Right, centuries later.
Yeah, it shows how incoming cultures didn't just overwrite Egypt. They absorbed its deepest anxieties and rituals. Greek and Roman citizens living in Egypt adopted the golden tongue because the fear of being silenced in the dark is a universal human anxiety.
That's a profound way to look at it. We've looked at how they engineered for the dead, both physically and spiritually. But let's pivot and look at how they engineered for the living, specifically when these different cultures and empires collided. And this brings us to the main event of this deep dive.
Yes, we are heading deep into the harsh western desert to the Dakhla Oasis to explore an entire community frozen in time.
Archaeologists have announced the spectacular discovery of a 1,600-year-old Byzantine city in Egypt's New Valley Governorate. For a bit of context, this city dates from the late 4th through the mid-7th centuries AD. During this period, which spans over 250 years, Egypt was one of the wealthiest provinces of the Byzantine Empire.
And to clarify for anyone who might not be super familiar with the timeline, the Byzantine Empire was essentially the surviving Greek-speaking eastern half of the Roman Empire, after the western half fell.
Right.
And during this specific 250-year window, they controlled Egypt. It's a deeply dynamic time that often just gets completely overshadowed by the pharaohs.
Completely. And the scale of what archaeologists found under the sand is staggering. We're talking about a remarkably preserved, holistic, urban layout. There are broad north-to-south streets intersecting perfectly with east-to-west roads.
A total grid system.
Yeah, there are organized city blocks and open public squares. It is like uncovering an ancient Roman sin city mapped perfectly onto the Egyptian desert. You can see exactly how traffic flowed and where commerce took place.
And unlike many ancient sites that survive as just scattered, disconnected foundation stones, the Dakhla Oasis settlement retains its fundamental urban mechanics.
Yeah.
And you need those mechanics because an oasis city isn't just a sleepy desert outpost.
Well, let's talk about that, because alongside this highly organized civic grid, the city was heavily militarized. The excavations revealed 2 massive watchtowers on the outskirts and a heavily fortified central structure. Which begs the question, if you are way out in the remote western desert, who or what exactly are you defending against? What requires 2 watchtowers?
You are defending against anyone who wants your wealth. And to understand why a remote desert city was wealthy, we have to look at the mechanics of the Byzantine economy.
Okay.
An oasis provides a constant, reliable source of water in an otherwise dead landscape. That water allows for immense agricultural surplus. We're talking grain, dates, olives.
So they were essentially a massive farm.
A farm that acted as a critical node in a massive global trade network. The Roman and Byzantine empires relied heavily on the annona, which was essentially a grain tax or dole, to feed their massive cities and armies. Egypt was the breadbasket of the empire.
Right.
So caravan routes crisscrossed the desert, carrying huge amounts of wealth, tax revenues, and luxury goods. A wealthy, isolated agricultural hub boosting with food and trade goods. That is a prime target for nomadic raiding parties, shifting political factions, or just organized banditry.
So the watchtowers aren't just for show. They are actively protecting the economic engine of the empire.
They're protecting the tax base and the trade routes. If the oasis falls, the trade route collapses.
And right in the center of all this heavily defended commerce sits a massive religious monument. They found a large basilica church anchoring the heart of the settlement.
And that basilica is what makes this site a physical crossroads of history.
How so?
Well, for thousands of years, traditional Egyptian religion dominated. But by the late 4th century, Christianity, backed by the Byzantine state, was rapidly replacing the old belief systems. So look at the layers of this city. You have Roman administrative governance dictating the street layouts, you have traditional Egyptian agricultural techniques pulling life from the desert, and you have the new Christian faith anchored right in the center square.
Wow. It's an entire civilization's transition point perfectly captured in stone.
Exactly.
It is so significant that the site is currently on UNESCO's tentative list for World Heritage status. But I want to zoom in from that macro level layout, the streets, the forts, the basilica. Let's step right into the houses. Let's look at the micro level of domestic daily life.
This is where we finally read the grocery lists.
Yes. The archaeologists uncovered dozens of residential homes. And these aren't just crude survival shelters. They feature vaulted stone roofs, fully equipped kitchens, bread ovens, stone grain mills, domestic courtyards, and storage rooms specifically designed for food, oils, and perfumes.
The presence of those specific items is a massive indicator of how this society functioned. When you find perfume and refined oils in a desert settlement, it tells you everything you need to know about their economy.
Because perfume is definitely not a survival good.
Right. It is a luxury good.
And I'm guessing it requires complex supply chains to even get out there.
Precisely. It means the trade routes protected by those watchtowers were functioning perfectly. It means the local population had enough surplus wealth from their agricultural output to actually purchase non-essential luxury items. They had the leisure time to bake daily bread in dedicated ovens and grind their own grain in private courtyards. They were living with a degree of highly civilized domestic comfort.
The excavations recovered all the everyday stuff you'd expect to find in a comfortable home, too. Domestic pottery, oil lamps, storage jars, household utensils. But out of everything they pulled from the sand, one discovery just absolutely blew my mind. They found nearly 200 inscribed ostraca.
The true voice of the city.
For those of you listening, an ostracon, plural ostraca, is basically a pottery fragment used as a writing surface.
Like ancient scrap paper.
Exactly. In the ancient world, papyrus was expensive and it was fragile. So if you broke a clay pot, you didn't throw it away. You used the broken shards as scratchpad paper. And these 200 fragments were written in both Greek, which was the language of the Byzantine administration, and Coptic.
With Coptic being the final evolutionary stage of the ancient Egyptian language, but written primarily using the Greek alphabet, it's really the language of the everyday people living in this transitional era.
And what they wrote on these shards is incredible. They record commercial transactions, personal correspondence, administrative documents, and just daily communications. It is literally the 4th century equivalent of sticky notes and text messages.
It really is.
We are so used to reading the grandiose, heavily curated propaganda carved into temple walls by kings. But how rare is it to find a broken piece of a pot where a guy in the 4th century is just asking his neighbor to return a borrowed tool or complaining about how much a jar of olive oil costs?
It is exceptionally rare, and it completely bypasses the filter of history.
Yes.
Grand proclamations carved in stone tell us how a ruler wanted the future to perceive them. An ostracon tells us how a society actually functioned on a Tuesday afternoon. When you find an ostracon that says, "I need 2 measures of wheat, I will pay you after the harvest," you are seeing the actual mechanics of credit, trust, and localized microeconomics. You are seeing real relationships.
It bridges the gap between us and them in a way a massive pyramid never really could. I mean, when you look at your own kitchen gadgets on your counter, or when you scroll through the text messages on your phone coordinating who is picking up groceries, you are actively participating in a continuity of daily human life that connects directly back to the people living in that desert oasis 1,600 years ago.
The tools evolve. Right. We use smartphones instead of broken pottery. But the fundamental human experience, trading, gossiping, cooking, worrying about security, relying on your neighbors, that remains remarkably unbroken.
So what does this all mean for us today? Let's bring this deep dive to a close. We have journeyed all over the timeline and the map of Egypt. We started by dissecting the mathematical, kinetic energy deflecting engineering of the Great Pyramid, built to defy the very earth it sits on.
Incredible engineering.
We traveled to the Mediterranean coast to uncover the golden-tongued burials, where everyday people engineered a spiritual tool to navigate a terrifying divine bureaucracy. And finally, we walked the perfectly planned grid of a Byzantine oasis city, peeking into their kitchens and reading their ancient sticky notes.
It fundamentally changes the lens through which we view the past. It forces us to see ancient people not as distant mythical figures, but as, sophisticated problem solvers.
For you listening right now, the biggest takeaway here is that true knowledge of the past isn't about memorizing the dates of empires or the names of long-dead kings. It is about seeing that unbroken thread of human ingenuity. It is about looking past the grand monuments and finding the mirrors that reflect our own daily lives, our own anxieties, and our own need to connect with each other.
And the irony is it's often the garbage, the broken, discarded potsherds, that tells us the most truth.
Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something to mull over regarding those ancient text messages. Consider this: we just discussed how 200 broken pieces of literal trash managed to survive 1,600 years in the desert sand to tell us exactly how ordinary citizens communicated, traded, and gossiped. But today, in our modern world, our personal correspondence, our receipts, our daily transactions, they're almost entirely digital. They exist on servers and in the cloud. Thousands of years from now, when the archaeologists of the future dig up the ruins of our cities, we will leave no physical ostraca behind. Is it possible that this ancient, forgotten city in the remote Egyptian desert has actually left a more permanent, readable record of its daily life than our highly advanced modern society ever will?
It's a haunting thought. We are simultaneously the most documented society in human history and potentially the most fragile.
Something to think about the next time you send a text message instead of writing a note on a piece of paper. Thanks for joining us as we stripped away the sand today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Okay, one question for you. If archaeologists discover a perfectly preserved 1600-year-old city beneath the desert today, what would you be most excited to explore first? The homes, the ancient church, the written records, or the hidden streets? Tell us why in the comment. Thanks.